So it's 2025, you're trying to learn to paint with gouache, but you don't know exactly what materials to use. Let's talk about it. Before I begin, I think it's just worth saying I'm not sponsored by anyone. I mostly just want to tell you what works for me and what doesn't work for me, and hopefully that helps you a lot. What we're really looking for when we're dialing into the kind of materials that we want to use for gouache are a couple of things. One, we don't want things that are going to fight us. We really want things that are going to make our process as smooth as possible. And especially since we're using gouache, which is a very tricky medium, finding something that's going to really be on our side and our team, that's priority. That's number one. Number two, we don't want our materials falling apart. And yeah, we just don't want that. Number three, we want the broadest expression of what gouache can do, because gouache can do so much, but not all materials can do that. And then we just want this thing to be like affordable. Like, can we not break the bank trying to get the things that we need? So these are what I'm looking for. And there's so many materials out there, so many options that you could choose from. Let's talk about where I would begin. Now, when it comes to paints, this is one of the places that can really make or break it. When I first started out painting with gouache, I really thought anything goes. I'll just try this, I'll try that, it's gonna be fantastic. It was not fantastic. There's so many things. If you're a good artist, you can make anything work, and so that's brilliant. However, I don't want my paints fighting me, and I don't want my paints fighting you either. And so as I start teaching, I came up with a whole bunch of students who have variety of different kind of brands. I understand that not everyone worldwide has access to all of the brands. So let's talk about some of the brands that are going to be really good. Because what I've found is that in terms of calling your paint gouache, it kind of feels like the wild west. It really could have anything in it. But what I've found is that there's 4 or 5 brands that I can really trust and rely on to make really good paint. And everything else comes with the caveat of it actually becomes a lot more difficult to, let's say, make really opaque passages. And this is gouache, so we want opaque paint where we want it. Some of them actually get a little bit more difficult when we start to try and make things transparent. And that's ridiculous. Why? We want a full expression of our paint. We want paint that doesn't fight us. Here are the brands that have really done well for me. If any of the extra ones come up, I'm gonna put them in the description below. But for now, here's the 5 brands that I like to use. The first brand is M. Graham Co. These guys really solid. Every time that I use an M. Graham Co. paint, I'm really happy. I just really am. They come out super solid and feel really nice. The next one is Winsor & Newton. Likewise, and we're looking for designer gouache. If it doesn't say designer's gouache, then it's going to be giving you sort of a lower quality student grade gouache that becomes actually very difficult to use at times. I have the feeling that student gouache is just actually, they're really designed for professionals because it takes a high level of expertise to actually make a student brand gouache work. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it. So go for the designer gouache. It doesn't mean you have to be a designer. You can use this for fine art and for whatever you want. Designer Gouache by Winsor & Newton is absolutely fantastic. The next is Holbein Artist Gouache. Now again, like the previous, that had a kind of gouache you should use and a kind of gouache that you need to be more careful about. This is Holbein Artist Gouache. So Holbein also does acrylic gouache, but we're not talking about acrylic gouache today. We're talking about traditional artist gouache. So Holbein Artist Gouache, these guys are fantastic. They have some colors that other brands don't have, and I really enjoy using them. They do really well. Now we have Daniel Smith Extra Fine Gouache. This is also really good. It does come at a pretty hefty price, and I would say that if we're looking at the difference between sort of these 4 main big brands, I wouldn't pay more for the Daniel Smith. They're gonna have some colors that the others don't have. This one's a King's Royal Blue, and I haven't found that anywhere else. So I'm very happy to buy that. But if you're just starting out, you don't need to go the extra expensive route. Find whichever of these are gonna work for you. Our next one is Turner Design Gouache. Turner's actually pretty good. I've really enjoyed using them. They do feel a little bit more fluid in here, and it's not just because of the plastic cover. When you get it out, it's a little bit more fluid. But if you like to use your gouache really, really thick, you can put it down and then wait, you know, like 10, 15 minutes, and it's going to evaporate a little bit. They tend to be pretty good quality, these toners, so I enjoy using them as well. And last of all, I don't have any with me today, but Nika Poster Color. Now, Poster Color is kind of the gouache equivalent from Japan and South Korea, and they make them, and they're generally used for production. We find them in production of, say, like Studio Ghibli backgrounds and a lot of anime backgrounds. And so it's essentially the same thing, more or less. Again, kind of like the toner gouache, they're a little bit more fluid, and they come in tubs, and so there's that design change of how you're using it. And so you can pull it straight out of the tub. That's a really nice factor. But they're also going to come in with some colors that are a lot less light fast. We want to be aware of that. In terms of light fastness, this is just maybe something else about the quality of a paint, is that any single brand can make light fast and non-light fast colors. And so rather than saying, oh, poster colors are not as light fast as gouache is, which is a generally well-held conception, but not always actually true, we instead want to be thinking about the pigments that are being used. It's more likely the pigments themselves, and so you just need to be aware of what the pigments are and whether you want to use them or not. But if you're just starting out painting gouache, then don't really worry too much about the light fastness. You're here for the practice, you're here for getting into it, and you don't need one more thing to stop you from using your paint. That being said, most brands have a chart with the light fastness of individual colors. You just want to look at that and decide whether or not you want to be using things that are light fast or not. And I try to always use sort of the highest light fastness I can, because I'm really happy to sell my paintings. If you see any paintings in here you want to buy, please contact me, because yeah, they're all for sale. Worthy of note, I think, is Himi Gouache. Himi Gouache is something that came over from China, and it is a gel gouache. And so they're going to come in really big tubs. This one's gross. It hasn't been used in a long time, except for when my daughter uses it. So Himi Gouache is good for what it is. And like everything else, it comes with some trade-offs. The trade-off for Himi Gouache, the positive trade-off, is that Himi Gouache, because it's a gel, is essentially always ready to use. Unless the whole thing dries out, it's always ready to use. And so it's always going to be a little wet, a little liquid. You can put it down. It's actually really good if you're trying to just get big chunks of paint down. That is its strength. But I personally don't teach with Himi Gouache. I don't suggest people use Himi Gouache as they're learning, because the flip side of always being ready to use is that it's a lot less accessible to try to get into really, really thick opaque paint, because it's always supposed to be trying to be the same consistency. It's also harder to use in thinner paint. It kind of gels up and becomes a lot harder to control. So it's really good at one thing, and it's a little harder on the edges of being really opaque or really transparent. And so if you're learning to use gouache, go ahead and use some of the other paints first, unless you just really want that single design aesthetic of just big, thick, chunky gouache paint. So you want to buy some paint. What is the key takeaway here? Don't go and get the Hobby Lobby version of gouache. Don't go and get the Michaels version of gouache. Don't go and get the cheap thing. It's really gonna fight you. It's gonna be difficult. It's not gonna make your life worthwhile. And gouache is already a hard medium. It's not worth fighting. So go ahead and just get a few of the basic colors in one of those 4 or 5 really good brands, and work your way from there. Now, if you want to learn more about what colors I use and suggest, let me know in the comments below, and I'd love to make another video about it if enough of you want that. But okay, now we have our paints. What are we gonna put the paints in? I've never quite found the perfect palette. I don't think one really exists yet, but I do have a lot of different options. None of them don't work. So let's talk about what is kind of worth exploring and what's not. When I first started out, I was painting in one of these. This is just a little tin palette. James Gurney uses one. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So you open it up like this, as places to mix your paint. You put your colors in here, and you go from there. It's very portable, very light, very nice, and there really is nothing necessarily wrong with it. It doesn't give you a great deal of space to mix, and my real problem was this, that my brushes won't always actually fit into these small wells of paint. And when we're dealing with watercolors tends to be used transparently, a little bit thinner than gouache. When you're painting with watercolor, you take less of the paint out of the wells. And so this can last you a long time in watercolor, and it just won't last as long in gouache. So I want bigger wells, I want bigger places to put my paint, as well as they end up being a little flimsy, and if the paint is wet, it will just drip out the side. And so that brings me to my next palette. This is a Magello. It is a sealed palette. And so you can see on the top, it has a seal that works its way around. At the very least, if I'm putting this in my bag, the paint is not gonna get out into my bag. And that's brilliant. Again, it also has bigger wells, so that if I'm using a big 1-inch thick brush, I can put it in there and take it with me. So if I was just in the studio all day, I'd be happy to use one of these. When I'm done at night, I can close up my palette, it seals off, which means it gets less air in there, less evaporation, my paint's gonna stay fresh for longer, and this is brilliant. So if you're looking for a studio palette, the Magello it's pretty nice. What I use these days to take with me as I travel is this guy. It's a big tin palette. It opens up and just has a large space for mixing with. Now I use this because these days I paint pretty big most of the time, and having this really massive space to paint with is just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. It also has a thumb hold, so I can hold it like this or hold it like this on my arm while I'm painting, and that just gives me extra grip to use, as well as having wide wells, and it's very, very nice that way. So this is what I take around with me. What I would love is something just like this, except where every single paint well seals as I close it, so that my paint is always going to stay fresh for longer and longer and longer. And I can put it in my bag, have it be turned and tossed around as I travel, and not have to worry about things splashing. So I think there's room in this industry. If you want to make something like that, please let me know, and I would love to explore that. I don't know exactly what the brand for that one is. Again, I'll place a link below. There's one more option, again, that I don't have with me, but actually this is the one that I recommend for a lot of starting students. So when you're painting with gouache, you can put your paint down as it gets down. One of the tricky things is that it dries pretty quickly as the water evaporates. And so there's something called a stay wet palette. At this point, there's a number of brands of them, and I don't have a favorite brand of them, but what it is it's a palette with a sponge and then a semi-permeable paper on top. And that semi-permeable paper, say that 10 times over. All that means is that you can put the paint on top and it's not gonna seep through the paper, but you put water into the sponge below and that water's gonna seep up and keep your paints active for a longer period of time. It kind of takes one more complication out of the process of painting with gouache, which is why I suggest it for starting students. But it is a bit cumbersome, so I don't carry it around with me wherever I go. Link to that one down below as well. So we've talked about paint, we've talked about palette, let's talk about paper, the 3 Ps. There are 2 types of paper that we can paint with when it comes to painting with gouache. The first kind is hot press, and the second kind is cold press. I'm gonna show you the difference. So this here is cold press paper. As we look at it, we're gonna see that there's a lot of texture in the paper itself. There is no right or wrong in terms of hot press or cold press. It's really actually just a matter of preference. When I'm painting small, I like to paint with hot press. And when I'm painting big, I like to paint with cold press. They're gonna take in the paint in slightly different ways, and it really comes down to a personal taste. So this is one where go ahead and try cold press, try hot press, see what you like. You can see in contrast, this hot press paper is really smooth. And so if you're trying to get smooth effects, big gradients, a really fine, small sense of detail, then hot press can be really nice. But there's a way in which cold press feels like it absorbs some of your accidents a little bit more. And so it can be really nice in terms of having everything turn out and feel very natural. If you like that inborn sense of texture, cold press is the way to go. If you want high levels of control, then hot press is the way to go. I generally experiment with both, but if I'm working small, I will more than likely use a hot press. And if I'm working large, I'll more than likely use a cold press. But as we saw, I was working pretty small on those little portraits with a cold press. It wasn't a problem. And here I was working pretty big in a hot press, also not a problem. So those are the two big categories of kinds of paper that we can use. We're always going to be looking towards working on a watercolor paper, generally actually just because it's thicker and is generally treated in a way that your paints are going to be accepted. But this is where the news is a little sour. Aside from your paint, your paper I'm not sure, your paper might actually be a little bit more important to get right than your paints are. Paper can do some really funky things. It can reject your paint. It can suck in your paint. It can never dry. It can dry really, really quickly. And so every single different kind of paper that you use is going to behave in a different way. My suggestion is find something that is very forgiving for you and stick with it, really learn it, and then slowly reach out to other things. But I do have some suggestions. First of all, my 100% go-to is arches, especially when you use a lot of water or some really heavy brushing. When you get into an arches, you can basically never destroy it. And that's what I love. Something that's going to actually accept my paint, not be destroyed, not pill up. Sometimes you can get into a paper and it just starts disintegrating underneath the paint. That's not worth it for me. I'm gonna waste time on a really good painting and have it just destroyed by the paper. I don't want that. So arches is a really, really good one. This paper here is Fabriano. The Fabriano hot press is really nice for me when I'm working on something that I think is going to be very opaque. I'm just going to put lots and lots of paint down, but I don't particularly myself like the way that it absorbs all of the water and all of the paint. It absorbs things a lot, and that's not my favorite. Again, personal preferences. Fabriano is a great paper. Arches is a great paper. Both of these I really recommend, and then just figure out which one feels better for you. Some of the Strathmore 500 series are pretty good, but they have a limit for the amount of water that you want to put to it. When I'm painting with gouache, I think about the amount of water that I want to use inside of my painting. And the more chunky of a painting that I want to make, really thick paint, just layers and layers of really, really thick paint, the less the paper that I'm using actually matters. Because at some point I'm painting on paint instead of painting on paper. And so I'm happy just to get chunkier and chunkier as I go on something that is thinner paper or a paper that's kind of going to reject my paint. And so really you start to think about the importance of paper more and more so with single layer paintings or paintings that have a lot of water in them. The more water you want to use, the less amount of different kinds of paper are actually going to be really good for that. Now, I would love to hear if there's any particular kind of papers that you like and you like to use a lot. And if you're searching for more variety in the kind of papers that you're looking for, go ahead and look in the comments. Hopefully someone's left something really good for you. Lastly, let's talk about weight of paper. So this is really about thickness, right? But we measure it in weight. We measure it in GSM or poundage. And it's really unfortunate that we could measure it in either, and we don't just have a single unit of measurement. But so it is, so it is. So to start off with, you can paint on anything. Here's some paintings I did of my kids on some computer paper. Just little quick sketches as they were playing. But what you'll find is that as you look at this, you can see that there's a bunch of warping that's going on here. And so the thinner your paper is, the more you're going to have warping. So you can paint on anything. But at some point, if you want a painting that you can put on your wall and be proud of and show, you want something that's a little bit thicker than this. The two weights that I look for are this. This is a 300 GSM, I think. You can see it's going to behave a little bit like this. It's very much still a paper, but it's pretty thick. It holds up to itself. And these won't warp too much. These are going to hold their own. They're going to feel like If you get a lot of water in one place in particular, you might get a little bit of warping, but it's always going to go back. If you were to look at this and compare it to what I just had before, if there was warping while I painted this, it's gone now. So it's something that's very presentable. You can put it on the wall. However, there's a point at which that's just not enough, where that 300 GSM isn't enough. And so going to a 600 GSM, this is going to give you something like this painting, which is more or less a cardboard at this point. And so when I'm painting big, I'm going to take these outside and have them really, really big, and they're just never going to warp. And that's brilliant. You can also cut them down really small, still paint on them, never have them warping. So if warping ends up being an issue for you, upsizing the weight of your paper so that you go from a 140 to a 300 GSM or a 300 to a 600 GSM. There's even a 400 GSM, which I think is a little thicker than this, but not quite that 600. And it might just be the perfect weight for something around about this size. I haven't used it though, because I have found that when you're working like this, one other way you can get rid of the warping is to actually put water on the front and water on the back. The warping is only going to occur when there's an uneven distribution of water on the paper. So if you then distribute your water evenly on the front and the back, it's not going to warp for a long time. And it may warp during the end of the process, but then closing it in a book or putting some heavy weights on it after it's done is really going to do the trick and smooth it out again. Here's a painting I did on a 600 GSM paper. You can see it's just really rock solid, and this is just the paper. And we compare that to a 300 GSM painting that I just did, accidentally just brought the wrong size paper. And it's decent enough, but while I was painting it, it was rough. It was rough. And I can still see a little bit of that warping. And so all I need to do is get some of that thicker paper, put it on, get some weights, press it down, it's gonna be great. So what's the key takeaway? Use those three big brands, Arches, Fabriano, and the Strathmore 500 series, and you're gonna be great. Also, look at the comments down below. Hopefully someone's commented some other things that work very well for them. Those are just the three that I know and I'm happy to work with at just about any other point. If it starts warping, go ahead and get a thicker paper. If you want a lot of really fine details or smooth gradients, get a hot press paper. If you want to lean into the textural stuff, get a cold press paper. Neither of them is the wrong option. Both of them are great. Paper matters. So we've talked about how important paint really matters. It's cheaper to get the good stuff and just get fewer colors, but the good stuff, it's gonna last longer, it's gonna be cheaper, you're gonna make better paintings, and you're gonna be so much more satisfied. Get the good paper as well, because it's not gonna disintegrate, it's not gonna reject the paint, it's gonna be decent, and there are some cheaper options for the good paper. This is really good news. But let's stop for a second and find something that really doesn't matter. Paintbrushes. And before we get on to talking about brushes, I have an 8-week online gouache painting class that I'd absolutely love to invite you to. I also have a free workshop called The Roadmap to Learning Gouache, where I tell you how I would learn to paint with gouache if I was to ever start again. I'd absolutely love you guys to join, learn, ask questions. The goal of that is to help you gain fluency with gouache in a way that took me years, it just doesn't have to take you years, to get you into a position where you can paint with gouache fluently in whatever way that you want, and to get you there as soon as we can. The link to those are down below in the description, and I'd love to see you there. So this is the bamboo roll that I take around with me wherever I go. I have a really long one because I have some of these brushes. These are Rosemary & Co. But actually, I don't find myself using those ones with gouache so much. They're really oil painting brushes. But the reason I say that these don't matter quite so much is because I have used so many good brushes and so many bad brushes, and I'm still left with a collection where this is a good brush. It was maybe, this one's a Rosemary & Co. Red Dot, and it was maybe, what, $13? This, I think, ended up, somehow ended up with a Temu brush, right? Like this thing is maybe $1. and it's brilliant at what it does. This is a CC3 Yasumoto from China. And I think, again, this is like a $3.50 brush and was my primary driver for a long time. This is an Atelier blending quill. I don't remember how much it cost, but it's maybe medium, right? This has got to be from, yeah, Artist Loft, right? not good. But it's flat brush, it is synthetic. And so all of these brushes they're not expensive. Some of them are, some of them aren't. And it's really about what you do with them, and the difference between a really good brush and a really bad brush is sort of minimal, but I do have some things that I really like. One of them is if the hair is coming out. If the hair is coming out, don't worry about it. Like just throw it out. It's not one that we want to keep around. Maybe you get 1 or 2 hairs come out at the very beginning of getting a brush. Wait until that kind of initial shedding period has come and gone. Otherwise, I really like a brush. Most of my brushes are springy, so they spring back into position. They're going to be very reliable, and they're always going to go back into position. And this just means that they're reliable. You're going to know where the point's going to be at any point in time. You can brush and then back into position. So if they're springy and soft, then they're great. These maybe thicker natural hair brushes are in fact a little bit more for oil painting, but they're going to give a bit more texture. So sometimes they're really nice to have around. But if you're just starting out and you're not sure what to use, do this. Grab a couple of these flats. Again, this one's just an Artist Loft. It's from, I don't remember which brand that means. It's Michaels or Hobby Lobby. But one of these, maybe get one this big, one this big, 1/2 inch, 5/8 inch. Oh my gosh, Americans. And then get a full inch. So grab those. Get some round brushes, 2 or 3 round brushes, one small, one big. And then I really like to have something like this. And these 3 all fall in the same category, all with different names, right? This one's a quill, but the idea is they have a very sizable middle. So you can pick up a lot of paint with them and put down a lot of paint all at once. And then they have an end that tapers so that you can get really fine details. That means that I can have one single brush and do a lot of work with it. Big chunky work, really fine detail work with a single brush, and maybe get a couple of sizes. Right here I'd say I really have 2 sizes or 2.5. This one ends up being pretty small when it's wet. This one's pretty big. This one's just a little bit bigger than that. And so grab a couple of sizes. So go ahead and get a couple of flat brushes like these, a couple of round brushes like these, and then a tapering brush like this. Really, ultimately, that is all you need. And so what else do I have in here? I have some of these, again, very classy, Master's Touch, but these are for when I'm painting really, really big, or when I'm trying to do a single effect over a large space. I can grab a lot of paint with them, put them out. But if you're just starting out, it's probably not necessarily worth it. You can do something very similar with this, which I think is actually just something from Lowe's hardware store. So the good news is your brushes don't matter nearly so much. They're more a place to have fun and to find out what works for you, to find out the things that are really nice. Ironically, at the same time, it's the forever question. What brush are you using? What brush are you using? I showed you some of my brushes. Hopefully that helps. Let's go over just a few more things that I use pretty constantly. I use one of these. It's just a little water container that blows up and down so that I can put it in my bag, carry it around with me, fill it with water, put it back in my bag again. Really nice, really easy, but it doesn't matter what you put your water in. When I'm taping the edges, there are different options for taping your edges. Some of the best are from Blick, just artist's tape. There's a brand called Pro Artist, and that's absolutely beautiful. The one thing you probably want to make sure that you're avoiding is drafting tape. Drafting tape has less stickiness to it. You'll put it down and then halfway through your painting it'll start coming off. It's not very fun to play with if you're doing what we're doing. Also, getting masking tape from the Dollar General or the Dollar Store or Crazy Store, whatever you want to call it, it generally doesn't work, right? You'll take it off and it'll just be really, really frustrating. But there are lots of general, generic masking tapes that are fine. The Pro Artist and the Blick tape is pretty good. The real key with these is don't leave them on for weeks at a time. If I tape up my board and then I go and paint on it, I'll make an effort to actually untape it at the end of the day, even if I know I'm going back in again tomorrow to the same location to paint again, because there is a chance that the tape adheres significantly. There's a tipping point where it starts to really stick, and then you can rip your paper when you're pulling it off, and you just don't want that. I always take around a little spray bottle with me. This is to either spray my palette to keep it active as I'm painting, or sometimes if I'm working transparently or at the very beginning of my process, spraying the paper. Once you get to the point where you're really thick gouache, you don't want to spray that, because you're gonna get those little spray pots in there, and you're gonna get the little marks absolutely everywhere. So that's easier on watercolor than it is on gouache. Really, if we're using our gouache like watercolor, spraying's great. It can provide a really nice texture. It can also ruin your painting if you've painted something delicate and thick in gouache. So I always carry one of these around. And then lastly, this is my easel as I'm out painting. And I like to use this. It is a watercolor filled easel, but specifically you want a watercolor filled easel. And the difference is this. Most easels, they'll stand up, they'll have kind of this tripod, or you might have a separate tripod attachment to it. But this face where you put your sketchbook or perhaps your paper, this face right here stays where it is. In a watercolor, it's actually going to hinge up so that you can have whatever degree of water that you want on here, and you can either have your water moving down slowly from the page or quickly. You can have it completely flat. And so having a watercolor filled easel, this one's from Cheap Joe's. I'm sure you can get them from elsewhere, but I actually find these hard to find. And mine is falling apart. If you have good suggestions, please let me know about other watercolor filled easels that I can find. But they have a hinge right here, so you can really put it at whatever angle you want and be painting at whatever angle you want. And then they compact down into something you can conceivably put in your bag, sometimes, but not always, and definitely not if you have cameras in your bag. So that is it for today. If you guys have any other questions about materials, I would love to hear them. Put them down in the comments below and we'll see what we can get to you.